So the overarching World of Warcraft team has started to do much more experimental events. We have things like Plunderstorm that has returned a second time now. That is a battle royale in World of Warcraft. We have something like Season of Discovery for Classic, which is kind of an experiment of how a Classic Plus system would work, but they also added a lot of additional elements with the different runes that allow you to heavily change up how every spec in the game could work, allowing different specs to be able to heal or tank when they originally want to be able to. And then we have what I think is probably the most successful version of these experimental gameplay modes in World of Warcraft Remix, and it seems like we have now just had it confirmed what our next WoW Remix is going to be. Now, if you never played the first Remix event, it was World of Warcraft Mists of Pandaria Remix, where you basically played the entirety of the Mists of Pandaria expansion. So all of the content ever released during that expansion, you got to play on day one. You made a new character for this. It was on its own server. And this was taking all of that expansion's content and giving you a completely different progression system on top of it, with what was easily the most cosmetically rewarding event in the entirety of the game's history. So basically, you would log in, you would do this intro scenario, you would get your cloak, which is basically how you scaled a lot of your power, and then you would start getting this remix specific gear, that then you would also be getting these remix specific gems that would give you a bunch of different powers. A couple of them would give you actual new abilities, one of them kind of being an ultimate. And then as you were progressing throughout the expansion, doing dungeons, doing quests, all of this type of stuff, you would get permanently increased stats. Pretty much everything you did could give you these stat boosting items that permanently infused your cloak with new power, and this was shared across all of your characters, so you could get up to the point of being able to basically one-shot bosses, even though they were scaled a lot more heavily than normal. And as you were going through, you would also get another currency that allowed you to either upgrade your gear or buy all of these different cosmetics. There's a bunch of new cosmetics and pretty much every cosmetic from the original expansion of Mists of Pandaria. So it was basically a new way to experience that expansion, but with a completely different progression element. And they did say they were inspired by things like ARPG seasons. They specifically mentioned something like Diablo 3, Diablo 4 has this, and it was incredibly fun. It allowed you to play all of these different classes of the retail game just in completely different ways because you could get so many stats and so many different effects. So that brings us to our most recent information, where we basically got to confirm that our next Remix event is going to be Legion Remix. Game Reactor did an interview with Ian Hazzikostas and Holly Longdale, which are two of the highest up people in the Warcraft franchise. So if two people actually know what's going on behind the scenes, it's definitely these two. But Holly Longdale had an answer to one of these questions where they were basically just asking about how they don't go retread the same ground they've done before because the franchise is so old at this point. And Holly Longdale, after saying it's a challenge, answered this. And players have been asking us, Mists of Pandaria was my favorite expansion, and we're going back there in Modern and in Classic. Legion was my favorite expansion. We're going to go back there and experience it in a new way. And when watching this interview, I was not expecting her to give that much of a tease or basically confirm what we're going to with the next Remix event. It really wasn't asked in a way to get this answer. It seems like she legitimately just wanted to tell people that we are going back to Legion for the next Remix event. Now, we do also have to put this into context with previous information we've received, because the first bit of this started when we got the 2025 roadmap for retail World of Warcraft, and there's the kind of date band at which parts of the years we're getting all of these updates. And at the end of that band, close to the end of the roadmap, it started to turn fell green. None of the other pieces of the band turn any colors. When we look at the previous roadmaps, the band going through it didn't change any colors. So a lot of people theorize that, we're going into Legion Remix because at the end of 2025 would be a similar time when we got Mists of Pandaria Remix when compared to the last expansion. So that's kind of what everybody else theorized. Then sometime after that, Ian Hazzikostas also did another interview where he was directly asked if that was Legion Remix. He didn't say specifically that was Legion Remix, but he kind of gave a tease that, it does look like this was turning into a bit of a fell green. So maybe we're going back to something that would fit into. Obviously, Legion Legion being the last Fel-focused expansion, and I think Legion being the obvious choice for the next remix event as well. But also with the tease for player housing that we got when we also got the 2025 roadmap, I think showed that there is going to be a pretty big change coming with the remix event. Because if you go back and look at the housing tease, it was a warrior character using the recently released tier 2 remix. So it was a warrior wearing the full warrior tier armor. And again, remember, that is class tier, so no other class would be able to wear that tier 2 armor remake. It would only be able to be worn by a warrior, but that warrior character in that tease sets down a weapon that is the rogue's artifact appearance for Thunder Fury. If you never knew this, one of the rogue specs during Legion actually had a remade artifact appearance that made it look like a rogue version of the old Thunder Fury weapon. This was not the original Thunder Fury model. This was specifically the rogue's artifact appearance, but it was being used by a warrior. Now, this was a sword appearance, so it would make sense a warrior would be able to use a sword. So my general theory is that they were teasing Legion Remix on the roadmap, which has basically been confirmed at this point, and then that artifact appearance being used by another class shows that they are probably going to open up some or all of the artifact appearances so other classes would be able to use them, which would just be a massive addition to allowing people to transmog different items. We've already seen that World of Warcraft retail has been having a lot of sets that kind of blur the lines between what type of armor it actually is, especially with a lot of the trading post armor sets. We also had all of the 3-piece sets that were class specific from the trading post also be allowed to be used by all of the different classes as well now. So it makes complete sense that with Legion Remix, they're going to open up all of these different weapons to all of the other classes. So if you can use that weapon type, you can use the artifact appearances from other classes, and then they're going to have Legion Remix that allows you to very easily go back and earn all of those artifact appearances in their current expansion. Now, this does beg the question, with Legion Remix basically been confirmed at this point, how are they going to go about the progression compared to Mists of Pandaria Remix? Because it's almost assuredly going to be heavily changed from Mists of Pandaria Remix, and I'm sure they want to do something completely different. I think the most obvious way to do this is they're going to play very heavily into the borrowed power systems of Legion as a whole. You have the artifact weapons, so maybe instead of putting all these gems in your gear, your artifact weapons are going to be maybe expanded with a bunch of new powers. Maybe instead of having this AP maybe instead of grinding bronze like we did in Mists of Pandaria, maybe now artifact power is what we're going to be grinding to upgrade all of our gear and our artifact weapons. So they're going to play into the theming of Legion Remix and just tune it to be much more of a remix event. There's a lot of ways they could go about tying in all of the remix specific progression into Legion's progression systems. And I think Legion is very much just one of the best expansions they could go to for a remix event. It's one of the borrowed power expansions, but it's basically the only one that's actually looked fondly upon. It's one of the best expansions in the game's history. Pretty much everybody who was playing back then, and a lot of people were playing then, has good memories of Legion as being a really good expansion. And then they obviously just have all the borrowed power that they could easily build the progression systems into. And there's a ridiculous amount of different cosmetics to go earn in that expansion. And I think it's also new enough where a lot more people would want to go back and earn stuff from there, because even though Mists of Pandaria is my personal favorite expansion and is very much looked back upon as one of the best expansions in the game's history, it's back far enough where a lot of people aren't too enthused to go earn a lot of the cosmetics from it because they're just much lower graphical quality because it's so old. But going into Legion is a more modern expansion, so I think a lot more people would also want to go play it just to earn the cosmetics just because it's a much newer expansion. So all in all, I think Legion Remix is going to be absurdly successful, and I'm very, very curious to see the progression of Remix that they add into that expansion as a whole. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.